following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha, Khanna, as we continue to focus on the Israel-Hamas conflict. In a major breakthrough in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, the two sides late Wednesday night announced a highly anticipated deal that would allow at least 50 hostages and scores of Palestinian prisoners to be released while offering the besieged Gaza residents a 4-day truce after weeks of relentless bombings and ground assault. After several weeks of Qatar-brokered negotiations, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet approved the truce accord after an all-night meeting in which he told his ministers this was a difficult decision but the right decision. The cabinet sign-off was one of the last stumbling blocks after what US officials described as 5 extremely excruciating weeks of talks. Hamas released a statement welcoming the humanitarian truce and said it would also see 150 Palestinians released from Israeli jails. Hamas said the resistance is committed to the truce as long as the occupation honors it. On the 7th of October, Hamas terrorists carried out an unprecedented cross-border attack, the worst in Israel's history that left 1,200 people dead, most of them civilians. The Hamas terrorists went on to capture some 240 Israeli and foreign nationals, including elderly people, women and young children, and they're currently being held hostage in Gaza. On the day of those attacks itself, Israel declared war on Hamas, vowing to bring the hostages home and to destroy the group. It launched a bombing campaign and ground offensive in Gaza, which, according to the Hamas government, has killed at least 14,100 Palestinians, including thousands of children. While Israel has agreed to a 4-day pause in the fighting in Gaza, it has made it clear that this temporary truce by no means would be the end of the war. What it has promised, though, is this. For every 10 additional hostages released by Hamas, there would be an extra day's pause in the Israeli campaign. The negotiations that have led to this agreement involved the US Central Intelligence Agency, Israel's overseas spy agency Mossad, Egyptian intelligence, and leaders in Doha, Cairo, Washington, Gaza, and Israel. Officials say 3 Americans, including a 3-year-old girl, are among the 50 hostages who've been earmarked for staggered release that begins from Thursday. US President Joe Biden said he was extraordinarily gratified that some of these brave souls will be reunited with their families once the deal is fully implemented. Qatar's foreign ministry too confirmed the deal, saying a number of Palestinian women and children detained in Israeli prisons would be released in exchange for the hostages. Now, ahead of the Israeli cabinet vote, Netanyahu had faced criticism from within his right-wing coalition, some of whom thought the deal gave way too much to Hamas. Hardline Minister for National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir signaled that he would vote against the agreement, saying it should include the release of Israeli soldiers as well, something that Hamas is bitterly opposed to. But with dozens of families in Israel who are desperate beyond words to have their loved ones back home, the Netanyahu government ultimately set aside any misgivings. Israel's hawkish defense minister Yoav Gallant said before the meeting that he had won an assurance that the deal would not spell the end of the war against Hamas. In a statement, the Israeli government said, and I quote, Israel will continue the war in order to return home all of the hostages, complete the elimination of Hamas, and ensure that there will be no new threat to the state of Israel from Gaza. The deal is expected to bring some desperately needed respite for the beleaguered Gazans, some of whom have expressed the hope that this agreement may pave the way for longer truces or even a total ceasefire in the near future. US officials say they are hoping that the deal would also lead to a full pause in fighting along the Israel-Lebanon border between Israel and Hezbollah, which, like Hamas, is backed by Iran. Large parts of Gaza have been flattened by thousands of airstrikes, and the territory is under siege with minimal food, water and fuel allowed in. Almost 7 weeks into the war, Israel has come under intense international pressure to implement a humanitarian ceasefire. But in recent days, it has pressed its offensive further into northern Gaza. At Jabalia's Indonesian hospital, the Hamas-run health ministry said Israeli strikes had killed dozens. The Israeli army later said its troops had directly targeted the source of fire from within the hospital. Israel maintains Hamas uses medical facilities to hide fighters and as bases for its military operations, making them legitimate military objectives, while insisting it does everything possible to minimize civilian casualties. The question is, while the release of the hostages is more than welcome, how much relief is this 4-day truce likely to give to the Palestinians in Gaza? And can this deal indeed pave the way for a gradual reduction in hostilities between Israel and Hamas?
Outside, there is a lot of nonsense talk, as if after we cease for the release of the hostages, we will stop the war. So I would like to clarify, we are at war, and we will continue to fight until we reach all our goals. In war, there are stages, and also in the returning of hostages, there are stages. But we will not let go until we reach the absolute victory and until we bring them all back.
Since the escalation of the current round of Palestinian-Israel conflict, China has constantly called for a ceasefire and made unremitting efforts to calm down the situation, protect civilians, and carry out humanitarian assistance. We welcome the temporary ceasefire agreement reached by the relevant parties and hope that it will help the humanitarian crisis, de-escalate the conflict, and ease tensions.
I welcome the agreement between Hamas and Israel that should lead to the release of hostages and pausing the hostilities and enable the delivery of humanitarian aid.
This morning, I have received 2 delegations, one of Israelis that have family held hostage in Gaza, and another one of Palestinians that have family in prison in Israel. They are suffering so much, and I've heard how much both of them suffer. Wars do that, but here we are beyond wars. This is not war, this is terrorism.
All right. So to dissect this very significant breakthrough, we are now joined by Ambassador Arthur Lenk, former Israeli diplomat. He joins us live from Israel. Lev Aaron is with us. He's an Israeli columnist and journalist and former coordinator of the India-Israel Parliamentary Friendship League. And completing the panel tonight is our Indian guest, Major General Sudhakar Ji, defense and geopolitical expert. Gentlemen, welcome back to Global Lens. Ambassador Arthur Lenk, if I could start with you, it would perhaps be an understatement to say that this deal comes as a huge relief, and I would say not just for Israel and the families of the hostages who've been waiting with bated breath for their loved ones to come back home, but indeed for the entire world that has been hoping and praying for a de-escalation in hostilities. How significant is this breakthrough according to you? And even though Israel maintains that this does not by any stretch of imagination mean the end of the war, how do you see it impacting Israel's ongoing campaign, one way or the other?
Yeah, good evening, Neha. It's good to be with you again. It's a nerve-wracking time in Israel. It has been for 7 weeks, and it very much is yesterday and today and clearly in the coming days, while we're all waiting to see these women and children that will come home and hopefully they'll be alive. Hopefully they'll be healthy and physically and in mind, and they will be back with their loved ones. But it's just a start, isn't it? If it's 10 today and 10 tomorrow and 50 this week, there's still 200 Israelis nearly. The fathers of some of these children will stay behind. And and Hamas will rearm. So I'm glad people are coming home. That's the right thing. It's good. But this issue isn't resolved. It's not behind us. And there are big challenges because it almost feels like terror pays, doesn't it? And that can't happen.
All right. Certainly, the war is far from over. But like I said, this is a major breakthrough, the first that we've seen since the beginning of the war 7 weeks ago, and comes as huge relief to all parties. And like I said, even the world is heaving a sigh of relief because we all want to see an end to this war that has already killed way too many people. But let me go across to Lev Aaron. Lev, what we know so far is this. Thursday onwards, the release of 50 hostages is going to take place in a staggered manner in exchange for a 4-day truce in the fighting in Gaza and in exchange for the release of 150 Palestinians who are in Israeli jails, mostly women and children, I believe. What Israel has also said is for every additional 10 hostages released, there will be one more day of truce. You know, some very interesting behind the scenes details have emerged in some sections of the American media, for example, about what went into these what have been described as excruciating negotiations that lasted close to 6 weeks. One of those interesting developments that has been quoted is when recently President Biden in San Francisco, attending the APEC summit, called the emir of Qatar and said, your time is up. The deal has to be closed now. What more can you share with us about what really went on behind the scenes in these last 6 to 7 weeks?
Okay, so I think the fact that we as Israelis, we got quite, let's say, a fair deal is also thanks to the ground assault, because right now Hamas feels that it is in a real danger. And this is what the IDF said from day one. They said if we have a successful ground assault, we will get a better deal from Hamas. So the gap between what was offered in the beginning and what we get now is not that huge, but it is still a bit better. So this is one thing. The second thing is that in a democracy, the concrete cry of the families of the hostages is stronger than the abstract geopolitical danger of Hamas in power in Gaza. And they became quite a constituency, the families, and also all of us, that we, even if they're not our, let's say, they're not our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, still we all feel terrible that our Israelis are now in Hamas hostage. We just try to imagine what nightmarish situation they are now. And this is causing us, many Israelis, to push the government to launch a deal with Hamas, even if we want the destruction of Hamas in Gaza in the longer run. And so in a way, from the Israeli side, I think we understood that only by the military power of Israel, we are not able to bring them home. The 200-something people who are there. We simply cannot. We don't know where they are. And in some cases, we know where we are, but we don't have the means to bring them without killing too many people. And on the other hand, I feel that Hamas felt each and every day that it loses commanders of its army, and also the legitimacy among Palestinians inside Gaza. So we needed these 40-something days for Israel and Hamas to digest that they need a deal, and they need a deal that politically can work for both the Israeli domestic politics and Hamas.
All right. Major General Sudhakarji, let me ask you this. Since the war began on the 7th of October, the international community has been accused, and I would say rightly so, of having failed miserably and just acting as a mute spectator as thousands and thousands of people continued to die. Of course, it all began with the massacre in Israel and then the killings of Palestinians on the other side. This is the first breakthrough we've seen in this war. Also, a big win perhaps for global diplomacy, given how so many countries were involved in these negotiations, not just Israel and Hamas, but Qatar and, Egypt and the United States and other players in the region. How significant is this breakthrough according to you? Apart from the fact that 50 hostages are going to be released and 150 Palestinian prisoners are going to return home as well, what do you think this 4-day truce in the fighting or 4-day pause in the fighting is likely to really mean? What impact is it likely to have on Israel's ongoing campaign?
Neha, good evening. Thank you for getting me to your show. As I understand, your question has got multiple parts, but I'll divide them primarily to two main headings. One is about the truce, the ceasefire, and the second is about the impact on the campaign. You see, in the history of military warfare, perhaps this is for the first time, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, that a truce has been established in such a short time frame. Kudos to the diplomatic efforts by multiple stakeholders and compliments to one and all of both the warring parties. But essentially, to answer the second part, which is the most important part, the impact on the ongoing campaign, I would like to address the issue in the following manner. Firstly, it has got a global perspective, a regional perspective, and a local perspective. And the second paradigm, or let's say the y-axis, has got a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term perspective. When I talk about the global perspective, partly it will answer one segment of your question, is that in spite of so much of effort, 6 weeks have passed by, why the global order has taken so much of time to bring about ceasefire and free the captive hostages on either side. Hostages, the Israelis in the Palestine with the Hamas, and the Palestine people with the Israelis or the soldiers. I personally feel that the existing architecture of the global apex organizations have become defunct. And given the fact after the League of Nations way back in 1949 or 40s, they having collapsed, the United Nations came into existence. Ever since then, be it the 1.0 Cold War or 2.0 Cold War, I think the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council have actually decayed in their effectiveness. So it highlights it's about time that we need to widen the scope of the representation to represent the global order much more comprehensively. One. Number two. The second point is that there is a cause and there is an effect. I'm not going to write to war and write in war under different kinds of acronyms, but there is enough substance under these two subheadings, right to war and right in war. You see, unless the trigger had happened, the IDF would have never invaded. But the trigger has got some kind of a long pending issue which needs to be addressed, which comes onto the other part of my paradigm is the short, mid and long term. When we talk about the long outstanding issue, historical issue, which needs to be settled, it brings me to one highlight that Israel today has gone in for the offensive or has invaded Gaza as a kind of a reprisal to what the Hamas have done. But have they announced formally the military aim? Any military offensive undertaken by any force in the world, they always commence their operation with outlined, crystallized, and absolutely defined military aim. While the military aim in the
Israel keeps saying our military aim is to wipe out Hamas. That's all we are told.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Their military aim, I as a military commander, as a general officer, I personally feel that a right to war, Israel has got the right to go to the war. Terrorism in no account, no profile can be accepted in any order in 21st century under the paradigm of rules-based order. They have the right to go to the war, and when they go to the war, the military aim is so far articulated as they will destroy the Hamas. When they talk about destroying the Hamas, what I understand as a military leader is that the leadership structure, that is the top leadership, the middle rung, and the low rung leaders, they should be taken into account. Number two, the logistic basis must be destroyed. Number three, the command, control, communication, and coordination centers, they must be actually destroyed. Until that happens, I don't think they would have achieved the military aim. There is a secondary component, Neha, if you allow me another minute.
Right, very quickly, sir. Very quickly.
That freeing the hostages also forms a military aim. So having said all this, every military campaign is supposed to be couched with a political aim and objective. In the instant case, I'm afraid the political aim has not come out in clear terms. As far as I'm concerned, the political aim should be to give a long-term perspective solution to the ongoing crisis.
The trouble there is Prime Minister Netanyahu refuses to even talk about the two-state solution. He and his far-right government have been accused of making the two-state solution virtually impossible. And of course, there are many in Israel who are very angry with Netanyahu, with his handling of this entire war, his failure to prevent the October 7 attacks in the first place. And I have interviewed many Israeli leaders, including two former prime ministers, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, who've told me that they believe that Netanyahu will not be in power for long once this war is over, and they are hoping that there will be a more moderate government in place in Tel Aviv soon, and then perhaps some sort of concrete steps towards, peace talks with the Palestinians can begin. Let me go back to Ambassador Arthur Link at this point, and I'd love to have his thoughts on the hypothesis that I have just laid out, because like I said, it's not come from me, it's actually come from two former Israeli prime ministers. Sir, I was wondering if you have thoughts on that, because everybody wants to know what really are the short-term, medium-term and long-term objectives that Israel is pursuing here, because to some, saying we want to destroy Hamas sounds vague at best.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I don't think it's vague. The question is how can Israelis and Palestinians be neighbors again? How can we live side by side in whatever political arrangement might or might not be possible? That can't be possible with Hamas in charge. Hamas says still now, that if they have another opportunity, they'll do it again. And ceasefires, it's interesting. I heard Hillary Clinton, the former American Secretary of State, say the other day, on October 6th, there was a ceasefire in force. It existed, but Hamas broke it. And so now they're interested in a break, that perhaps they can regroup, not so that they can make peace, not so that Palestinians can get humanitarian assistance, not so that Israelis can get humanitarian assistance, but so that they can plan more attacks, so that they can plan more. I think that the way forward could be happen today. Let all the hostages go. Step away, Hamas, and free the people of Gaza from Hamas. Then lots of things are possible. Israelis know how to make peace, right? We've made peace with Egypt. We made peace with Jordan. We made peace with the Emirates and with Bahrain. We know how to make peace. We do. And you spoke with some former leaders who talked about the desire to live in peace with our Palestinian neighbors. We would like to be able to do that. But how is that possible with an organization that still hasn't been held to account for rape and for murder and for massacres? And it's just awful, and it just can't go by the by. It can't win. and for us to be able to turn the page. And we're not looking to get retribution. We're not looking for revenge. We're looking to create that reality that you're talking about, Neha, to be able to create a possibility of Israelis and Palestinians being neighbors.
Coexisting. In fact, Ehud Barak very interestingly told me the two-state solution is the best solution. We should never lose sight of it. A former Prime Minister saying that. But Ambassador Link, let me ask you another question. You know, you say that we cannot coexist in peace with an organization like Hamas. Of course, what they did on the 7th of October was absolutely monstrous. While, you know, one understands the rage that Israel felt following 7th of October, there is mounting pressure on Israel today and criticism of its actions, because while very unfortunately 1,200 Israelis were mercilessly butchered by the Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October, in the subsequent 7 weeks of the war, more than 14,000 Palestinians have lost their lives, according to the figure that we've been given, and thousands of these people were women and children. So let me ask you this question. You said interestingly, release all the hostages and then maybe we can talk about peace. So I'm going to ask you this. 50 hostages are going to be released over the next few days. And Israel has already said that for every additional 10 hostages released, we are going to extend the truce by 1 day. You have about 240 hostages who are still in Hamas's captivity. Let's see if Hamas takes you up on that offer and eventually does release all of those 240 hostages, even if in a staggered manner. Is there then scope for a total ceasefire?
Inshallah. It would be wonderful if that optimistic prayer that you just expressed, Neha, would be answered. Inshallah. Unfortunately, Hamas are my neighbors, not yours. And we see, and we don't just see, we listen. What are they saying? What are their words when they come on international media? And what are their goals? Their goals aren't to live side by side with us. Their goals are to destroy us. And we're not going to be destroyed. And it's interesting, you know, on a lot of times that I've been on these programs, and yours and others, people have talked about proportionality. It's interesting. Suddenly, Hamas isn't interested in proportionality, right? We're releasing 3 criminals, 3 terrorists for every 1 Israeli woman and child. Suddenly, proportionality doesn't matter so much. It's interesting in that way. Israel's not surrendering. Israel's not stopping. Hamas has to go for the benefit of Israelis and Palestinians alike. Then we can turn the page.
Okay, let me come to you. Of course, Israel is on record as having said this war is not going to end. In fact, there are very interesting reports that suggest that ministers like Yoav Gallant and Ben-Gvir and certain others were actually not happy with this deal at all. Ben-Gvir was of the opinion that Israeli soldiers should be on the list of released hostages, something that of course Hamas has completely ruled out. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu had to give his coalition an assurance that let's get our people back, but the war is not going to end. The campaign, the military campaign will continue. How do you see this panning out over the next few weeks? Yes, 150 Palestinian prisoners are going to be released from Israeli jails. But I would still, like to ask you, what do you think is in it for Hamas? The fact that it has actually agreed to release so many hostages, in return, it gets 4 days of a pause in the fighting. What does that really mean?
There is no doubt that both Hamas and Israel have accepted the current agreement out of a state of weakness. Both Hamas and Israel. And if we delve into it, we see that Israel could not get the hostages back, while Hamas saw that the Israeli Arabs, the West Bank, Hezbollah, Iran, nobody supports them. Like a few demonstrations, even very big one like in London, are not a real pressure on Israel. So I think Israel understood that there is no other way to bring them back. Hamas understood there is no other way to breathe and to get even these 4 days. So I think this is one thing, but still in Israel there is a great fear that once you say for each 10 hostages you will get 1 day free, it will be very difficult to renew the ground assault on Hamas, because in a way it gives Hamas the keys for ceasefire at each and every moment. And this is the reason why Defense Minister Gallant is not very happy with the agreement. I don't want to speak about Ben Gvir. Ben Gvir, as far as I'm concerned, he's like a clown. Okay, he's like he never served in the army. No, I cannot put a general. Maybe this general is mistaken. Maybe he's right, but he's like a serious person who is part of the establishment. And to put him in one sentence with a guy who did not serve in the army and is more in the media than doing his job as a minister, as a cabinet minister. So sorry to share this like domestic politics of Israel, but I think what Gallant is afraid is that until now the keys were in our hands, in the Israeli hands, and right now in a way we gave the keys back to Hamas. At each and every moment that they feel that the assault is too painful for them, they can say, okay, we give you 10 hostages, give us 1 day without a war. Now, it is not only 1 day without a war. Also, part of this agreement is that for like at least 6 hours, our airplanes cannot fly above Gaza for intelligence. So it is not only the question if soldiers are getting killed. The issue is that they can regroup as far as Gallant is concerned, while we cannot see them regrouping. So I think this is his main concern, and I think many Israelis share this concern, even if their last verdict is that we should sign this painful agreement and bring at least these 50 innocent Israelis who did not do any harm to Hamas, many of them helped Palestinians, bring them back home.
But Lev, let me ask you this. You know, you're saying whether it's the defense minister, you have Gallant, or other Israelis, they've expressed this fear or concern that every additional day of a truce gives Hamas the opportunity to regroup and perhaps mount a bigger offensive against Israel. But fact of the matter is that from day one of the biggest stated objectives of the war launched by Israel against Hamas was to bring back all the hostages safely. I know Israel keeps talking about destroying Hamas, but one of the most important stated objectives is we are going to bring our people back home. So I'm going to ask you, if there is a window of opportunity offered by Hamas itself, that one by one or 10 at a time, you can actually get each of those 240 hostages back, well then, isn't it worth it? Isn't it something that Israel has been looking to do? And at the end of the day, when you talk about the sentiment, the popular sentiment in Israel, we know how anxious the families of the hostages have been. They've protested outside Netanyahu's residence, and only recently they said, please stop talking about executing Palestinian prisoners. This is going to jeopardize our people. Don't do anything reckless. So isn't that a very big objective?
First of all, I think that each and every move that the far right-wing parties are doing now in Israel should be condemned, because this is like a time that you don't say high words when we need to release our hostages. And each and every Israeli that I meet, and most of them do not have relatives in Gaza, they do not sleep at night, because for them it is part of their family. And for them, even these 50 people that coming back to Israel, it is a huge relief psychologically. So of course it is something that we need to achieve to bring all of them home. But still, I think we should put some kind of a barrier, let's say, between, separatist group in India that you know well in the past, let's say Assam or Kashmir or Punjab or Nagaland and Hamas. Because you have separatist groups in many places in the world that say, this is my land, I want to have sovereignty in my land, never mind if they are right or wrong, okay? Hamas says there is not a single inch of Israel, which is Israel. All of it is Palestine. And we have the full right to enter Israel, kill everybody, and make it a Sharia-based Sunni Hamas regime. So Hamas is not simply a separatist group that says, okay, you are occupying a land and we want this land to be free. It is a group that says there is not a single place that you can live which really belongs to you. And in this sense, I think that Hamas is a unique terrorist group, and that's why there is a consensus in Israel that the Hamas regime has to collapse.
Okay. Major General Sudhakarji, let me ask you this. And I've put this question to my panelists on this show even in the past. How realistic is Israel's target or goal of quote-unquote wiping Hamas off the face of the planet? Yes, they're going after their military infrastructure. A lot of their leaders, by the way, are far away in Qatar. To what extent do you think they can actually achieve the goal of finishing off Hamas? And, another point that has been made by many is Hamas is not just a terror organization, it's something that Lev alluded to, it is also an ideology. And it's virtually impossible to completely stamp out an ideology.
Neha, I must compliment you for putting your finger on the issue, the main core issue. There are no quick answers. In my opinion, no terrorism anywhere in the world can ever be contested successfully and wiped up by military means. Terrorism is an option which is exercised by the weakest of the stakeholder or the warring party. Once the weaker segment resorts to the hybrid or the terrorism activities, it is very difficult, because in terrorism lies an ideology, there is an infrastructure, there is a factor of invisibility. Hamas cannot be, it is not written on the forehead or on the sleeves that they are Hamas. It's very difficult to identify, and it is fraught with huge collateral damage, which calls for attention for the humanitarian essence. So basically, coming back to the first point that you have asked, is it a tangible, substantive military goal, as has been articulated by Israel so far, to decimate or to destroy Hamas completely? My answer is no. No terrorist organization can ever be decimated or destroyed completely. If you think that 30,000 Hamas are going to be destroyed, there will be another 30,000 created by the surrounding regional factions. One. Number two, the statement that you alluded in the second part, I apprehend that violence will always beget violence. So therefore, at some point in time, we need to actually give little caveat, little space for or accommodation to listen to each other, try and address the aspiration of the warring parties. I understand Hamas have made it, I must compliment the co-panelists, they're beautifully covered. We are totally with them. India is totally with Israel and the insecurity. But at the same time, where lies the solution? What is the solution for the global order today? The Hamas have set the objective. In the discussion today, we are talking about they will not allow Israel to exist where they exist today. But I say beyond that, there is a challenge to the rules-based order in the international order today. So therefore, Hamas, first of all, in the United Nations, would do well if they identify and blacklist Hamas and brand it as a blacklisted terror organization, which has not been done so far. Whichever nation states, I would say USA, European Union, UK, and some more countries, they have already, Canada, Australia, they have branded, they have blacklisted this thing, but that is not enough. The United Nations Security Council has to actually blacklist this organization and call it a terror organization. Second point that must come about is, besides the military offensive, I personally feel that a peace talk endeavor should be undertaken in earnest. Qatar, like stakeholders like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran. I would highlight that if Iran is kept in the grip I think 90% of the problems can be resolved.
That's very
And
interesting, because I think Iran is the last country that Israel wants to talk to, because they believe that Iran is the architect of 7th October. But let me take this back to our Israeli guests. Ambassador Arthur Lenk, is Israel, if we could just have the ambassador up on the screen, please, is Israel being rather simplistic in its approach when it says we're going to finish off Hamas once and for all, and then we're going to live in peace forever? It'll be all good thereafter. Because we've seen how ideologies work and evolve. We've seen how terror organizations spring up and evolve over time. Couple of decades ago, correct me if I'm wrong, the Palestinian Authority was accused of indulging in a lot of violence. Today, Hamas makes Palestinian Authority actually look good. There are people, many people who today say that Palestinian Authority is acceptable to us compared to what Hamas has done. We've seen organizations like the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, Boko Haram, Hezbollah. It's a very long list. So how do you completely kill and root out an ideology? What really is the long-term solution? Is Israel truly focusing on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And by the way, I would start, by the way, with asking General Sudhakar ji to have India lead that role at the United Nations to have Hamas blacklisted. I very much appreciate that idea, and India is the perfect country to take that on. I hope it does. But I think that the important point, and I think that all of us have been talking about this, the Palestinian people aren't our enemies. They're not. The terrorists are. The people who think that violence is a solution, the people who are happy that hospitals or schools are used to hide terrorists, those aren't the people we can make peace with. But I think that there are many Palestinians that are open to a new possibility, and I think Gaza is going to need new possibilities on the day after. I'm sure that with the reality that Gaza comes at us looking like a neighbor, striving for coexistence and a two-state solution, Israelis will meet them halfway. We've already shown, I've said it earlier, that Israelis know how to make peace. We know how to live with the other, with people who are different than us. Israeli society is diverse and different. But Hamas is holding Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and Jews. They didn't care. They're holding them all. They shoot them all. They shoot at music festivals and in people's homes. They don't actually even care about Islam because they broke every law in the Quran in their actions. Israel is ready today to start talking and finding a new path with our Palestinian neighbors. It was always the way. The question is if you come to attack us, if you come to threaten us, should we just turn another cheek? No, of course not. The answer is Israel is going to push back on the terrorists, is going to change the reality for Gaza. And I believe that there are lots of positive possibilities. And I agree with my colleague from Israel that the extremists in Israel don't represent the vast majority of us. One of the failures of the current government is that this tiny portion of Israel that doesn't represent the vast majority of us are saying absurd things. And today's a day that we're going to get many, 10 or 12 tomorrow, the first Israelis home. We're going to celebrate that, but then we're going to go back to work.
I'm glad you acknowledge, how a lot of these elements in the government do not represent the sentiments of a majority of Israelis, because frankly, I think it would be safe to say that a lot of Israelis are embarrassed by a Ben Gvir. But last question for you, Ambassador. When we look ahead and again talking about what comes next, let's say theoretically you achieve your military objective of bringing the hostages home and wiping out the military infrastructure of Hamas in Gaza, in those tunnels or wherever it may be. What lies ahead? If Israel is convinced that it's not going to reoccupy Gaza, as has been clarified recently by Prime Minister Netanyahu, then who do you think can take over? Because there cannot be a vacuum. There are some who say we're willing to talk to the Palestinian Authority, they are a more moderate force. Then there are Israelis who say, of course not, their ideology is not all that different from that of Hamas. So then what is an acceptable alternative to Israel? There cannot be a vacuum.
Yeah, firstly, it's absolutely right what you just said. It can't be Israel. Israel left Gaza over 20 years ago. We're not going back to stay. It's not part of Israel. It's not part of our future. There's going to be an interim time that perhaps, I don't know, countries like Egypt and Jordan and the UAE could be of help. Perhaps India could be of assistance in that regard. But I think in the long run, what we would like, I think a best case scenario, is a Palestinian leadership that doesn't see us as the enemy, that doesn't see us as a zero-sum game, people that they can't live with, that doesn't see all of us as Jews who could just be pushed into the sea and killed and celebrate with candies and with fireworks. I know lots of Palestinians who see Israelis as neighbors. I hope for the time, because I think that would be good for Palestine too, but it certainly would allow us to live as neighbors and live safely for all people. That's really the goal of the State of Israel. It has been since Israel was created in 1948.
Okay, Lev, what are your thoughts on that? Let's say Hamas does make an exit from Gaza at the end of Israel's military campaign. Who takes charge of the Gaza Strip? Is the Palestinian Authority an acceptable alternative to Tel Aviv? Are you looking at other Arab nations to step into the breach? What are the scenarios that we're looking at?
So look, even within me, there is some kind of a contradiction, okay? Because on one hand, I think Netanyahu's big tragedy is the paradigm that one can humiliate the Palestinian Authority and lift up Hamas. In a way, this is the reason why people say it is like the end of his political career, this paradigm that has failed. On the other hand, if you called me and told me, look, I want to donate some money to the Palestinian Authority, should I do it? I would tell you Palestinian Authority is venal and corrupt. Out of your 1 rupee, even 1 paisa will not go to the place it should go. Because so many middle people, so many rich politicians and so on. So in a way, Palestinian Authority is hated by so many Palestinians because they are so corrupt. And we also should be honest about it, about the way that they handled the crores of dollars, billions of dollars that they got, and they went nowhere. We don't even know where they are. And many countries decided to stop giving money. So maybe the third way that we cannot see yet, it is still blurred, is that first we need some kind of a military victory over Hamas. And only once it is crystal clear that Hamas has been defeated, only then people who are too afraid to say now we are ready to take the power. Maybe once Hamas is not there and they are not afraid to be punished later by the extreme jihadist Hamas, then they will say, okay, now we are ready to be more responsible for the Palestinian people in Gaza. It could be from inside Gaza. It could be Arab countries around us who have peace with Israel. And also international force. We have in Sinai international force. We have in Lebanon international force. So this is something that could happen. But first, people should be sure, the organizations should be sure that Hamas is not there forever. And last sentence, of course, we cannot kill the idea of Hamas. We cannot kill any horrible idea. But we can kill the political legitimacy of Hamas, like we killed many other bad ideas. They're still there, but their political clout is not as much as it was, let's say, 30, 40 years back.
All right. One thing that I find extremely interesting is, you know, the candor with which you spoke about how you believe, and so do many others, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is guilty of having strengthened Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority, and today the Israelis have paid or are paying a huge price for it. Is Hamas to some extent Netanyahu's Frankenstein monster? But of course the bigger question remains, where is this war headed? What does this deal on the release of hostages really mean? Can we indeed see a cessation of hostilities anytime in the foreseeable future, or is this going to be a long drawn out war? Well, the jury is still out. But Ambassador Arthur Link, Lev Aaron, Major General Sudhakarji, as always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, and that's all that we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.